Here's my co-professor here today, Lisa Epstein, and I'm going to dive into this. We've arranged this as 100 introductory facts about mortgage securitization and securitization issues in foreclosures. Obviously not an easy topic, so thank you all for being here. I'm going to go through these. I don't mind being interrupted for questions. If you want to comment, you might want to hold it a little bit just because it's probably covered in number 88 or number 47 or something. So we're going to see what we can get through. Most mortgages in the United States are owned by trusts, and a lot of people didn't know that up until about 2 years ago. Now it's beginning to be pretty common knowledge. By the way, if you want to share this, this is on frauddigest.com, which is my website. On yours already? Not yet. And it will be on foreclosurehamlet.com. Hopefully we'll send it on to Occupy Our Homes and they can offer it there as well. The trusts are often referred to as RMBS trusts, which is shorthand for residential mortgage-backed securities. The total U.S. mortgage debt is between 12 and 14 trillion dollars, which is more zeros than I always have to work backwards once I get past about 9 zeros. Of this, approximately $8 trillion was owned by trusts in the U.S. in 2008. These numbers are, I always say approximately or about, because there is just no source anywhere that really has definitive information on this. So I use the numbers that I see most often out there, and these are what I put in this. I'm going to stop along the way, as I did last time, to talk about some of the issues that translate into action or why it's important to do certain things. So I have 3 of those in this paper, why it's important to learn about mortgage securitizations. And the first reason is most of the foreclosures in the United States in the last 5 years were filed by mortgage-backed trusts. Most of the foreclosures filed in the next 5 years will be filed by mortgage-backed trusts. And if you want to test this, you can go to the courthouse on the other side of this building to the 4th floor, Monday through Thursday, at the 8:45 hearings, and there'll be the docket sheet up, which is just like the menu for what terrible food is being served inside that courtroom that day. And it lists all the cases by name, and you will see Deutsche Bank Trust Company Americas, Deutsche Bank National Trust Company, as trustee for, and then the name, this strange little shorthand name for some trust. But you will see that while there are certain foreclosures filed by Wells Fargo and Countrywide, and some banks that don't even exist anymore and haven't existed for several years are still existing in the courtroom 2 blocks away. The most of the foreclosures are being filed by trusts. So that's reason number 1. If you're interested in foreclosures and in home ownership in your own communities, you have to know a little bit about mortgage-backed trusts. Okay, the trusts are made up of a bundle or pool of mortgages. When I first did this, I had those little Monopoly greenhouses. There's about 5,000 mortgages in an average mortgage-backed trust. Sometimes they're called pools of loans, sometimes they're called many other things. So imagine, Jenna will like this, imagine, if you will, that these are each 4 different loan pools, and each of the little dots in these pools represents 100 loans, 100 mortgages, 100 homes. There's a significance to the color scheme that I'll go into a little bit later. But so this is about 5,000 mortgages that have all been bundled into one trust, and the average value of the mortgages in each trust is between $1 billion and $2 billion. Now there are at least 4,000 trusts. I can't tell you how many trusts there actually are, because while some trusts that are publicly traded have to register with the SEC, a lot are privately owned and they don't. We have no idea how many trusts are really out there that are privately owned trusts. So you just have to think of a pile or a pool of mortgages that have been combined and made into something investors can invest in. individual mortgages get put into these trusts, and then the trusts themselves, you could make, this board could also indicate a CDO, a collateralized debt obligation, which would mean that each of these represents a slice of an RMBS trust. So the first layer you're going to know about is all the trusts got combined into RMBS, residential mortgage-backed securities. And then those got sliced up just like this, and they got organized into something called collateralized debt obligations. That's the second layer of investments. The other thing you need to know about these pretty much off the start is that you can bet for or against the success of these investments. You can bet that these investments are going to succeed. You can also, especially if you're a hedge fund manager, bet that these investments are going to fail. And one of the things that our government discovered way too late was that many of the people who were putting these trusts and collateralized debt obligations together and offering them for sale were the same, and saying wonderful things about their potential for success and why our dollars should be put into this, and I'm going to go into why I call them our dollars. We're at the same time betting huge amounts of money that these would fail. And two of the worst banks and securities companies that were doing that were Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank, the great big German bank. So they were making hundreds of millions of dollars betting against the success of these. At the same time, they were telling pension fund heads and why they should invest in them and what a good deal they were and how they were AAA rated by the ratings company. They were calling them in emails to each other, which were then discovered in our in-congressional reports. They were calling them crap and pigs and piles of slop. And what fool will I get to invest in this? That's the kind of things they were saying about the investments they were putting together. That's all in congressional reports. There's an article about one of the big congressional reports on Fraud Digest that I wrote, which just excerpted the comments of Greg Lippman, who was one of the major marketers of these products, and he worked for Deutsche Bank, and he was one of the people who called them crap and slop and pig, and he's quoted today in the New York Times because he's encouraging people to invest in these. He thinks the market is going to be good for these again. But so I wrote an article that's on Fraud Digest, which excerpted the Greg Lippman comments, just so that if people didn't want to read the 400-page congressional report, they could still get outraged just by reading the summary of it. The mortgage loans in each pool usually include both first and second mortgages, or sometimes called first lien and second lien loans, and fixed rate and adjustable rate mortgages. So, and not only will there be that combination of different kinds of mortgages in a particular pool, they're usually represented geographically from all over the country. So you'll have California, Utah, Florida, New York, New Jersey loans all in one trust, fixed rate and adjustable rate first and second mortgages. There are different layers within each trust or pile of mortgages, and these layers go from the very best loans to the loans that are very questionable indeed. And the layers are sometimes called tranches, and the same is with the CDO obligations. It's I think they like to use the word tranche instead of layer because it makes them feel better about how smart they are. But it's just a layer of loans within a trust. Certificates are issued to the investors in the trusts to represent the purchase. So the people who actually invest in these trusts are often referred to as certificate holders. There are often minimum investment requirements, so you can't put $5,000 investment into a trust. The minimum I've seen is $100,000, but there are higher minimums. So we're talking about institutions that normally would be investing in these trusts. The loans are selected for each pool by a given date, which is called the closing date of the trust. So somebody, and I'll tell you who that is gathering up these 5,000 loans, and they are putting them in the pile, and they have to have them all in. They have a closing date, right? Just like you have a February 29th, get out of town or go to jail. They have a closing date. By February 15th, all the loans have to be in the trust, which it becomes very significant when later on they're making up documents, they ignore this fact, and they're adding loans to the trust 3 and 4 years after the closing date of the trust, which never would have happened. One of the red flags is how you know it's a fraudulent document, is that they are ignoring the closing date. Sometimes loans can be substituted in after the fact. As you might imagine, you know, you've got this pile of loans that you make up a trust, and at the last minute, some of them don't close, some of them sell, and so they are substituting some in after the closing date, but they're very strict rules about what they can substitute in. All of this, the pool of loans, what it's comprised of, and how they're going to run their particular trust is described in several documents, and one is called prospectus, and a prospectus for a residential mortgage-backed trust is similar to a prospectus for any other security. It just says, this is what we want you to invest in. This is a very detailed description of how we plan to run this, how we plan to make money doing it, our rules for operating, where we're going to keep our money, how we're going to distribute our money. There's really, really a lot of detail in a prospectus for any kind of security, and it's true of RMBS securities as well. I say think of a prospectus, and Lisa and I are going to suggest ways to look at a prospectus. If you've never looked at a prospectus for an RMBS trust, it's worth looking at. Don't try to understand every line, just keep going until you find some sentences you do understand, and then read through it another time, and there'll be 4 or 5 more sentences you'll understand, and eventually you understand a lot of what's in a prospectus. I say it's a lot like that glossy brochure you get when you go into the showroom to buy your new car, and it shows you all the features, all the colors, and gosh, isn't this a beautiful car, and this will be the best car you ever bought. That's largely what a prospectus is. And on almost every other page, there'll be in the fine print all the reasons why you shouldn't rely on this prospectus. That there are a lot of things that you shouldn't rely on, and don't sue us if everything we said here turns out to be dead ass wrong. So that's what's in a prospectus. Many representations are also made in the pooling and servicing agreement. I was going to bring one, but my car is too little. It's a 400-page document to 600 pages. Most of it is exactly the same from trust to trust to trust. You'll recognize it. Again, if you've never read a pooling and servicing agreement, you can get them both on the SEC website, usually, for some of them. Search around a little bit. There are plenty of companies that will get them for you for $200 to $400, but they are all free. You can get them all for free if you look hard enough, and call people, and when you get stuck, there are people you call. I always call Lisa, so don't call me, I call her when I get really stuck. But there are other places. Stop Foreclosure Fraud, the fellow who runs that website. Michael can probably find anything if you give him at least 2 hours at lead time, because he's doing other things as well. So the pooling and servicing agreement is abbreviated a lot as the PSA. Have you looked at the PSA? And it has rules for acquiring mortgages, and the end dates and the closing date, all the rest of this are set forth in a PSA. Read the definitions section first, because it's sometimes helpful. I always look first to a section called 2.01, conveyances of mortgages. It's the same in almost every single PSA, and it gives the rules for how the trust is going to acquire the mortgages, and in there you'll almost always find that the trust is not going to be allowed to be acquiring non-performing loans or acquiring any kind of loan 2 years after the closing date of the trust. I say this because there are, in our courthouse over there, at least 250,000 documents showing the trust's acquired mortgages 3 years after the closing date of the trust and acquired non-performing loans. So something is really amiss here. Either all those documents are wrong and lies and fraudulent, or the rules of the trust weren't followed. But the real reason is they were made up by mortgage document mills, and we'll get into that. And on number 12 here, I put in some of the representations that are made. I just lifted something from, all these trusts have such wonderful names. Some of them have very straightforward names, like Seawalt, you begin to know. CWALT means Countrywide Alternative Loan Trust. CWABs, Countrywide Asset-Backed Securities. But some of them they name things like Soundview, Harbor View. It sounds so lovely. It sounds like a nice community by the ocean. Hi. And then the number after the name of the trust, like Seawald 2005, means that that trust was made in 2005. If it's 2005-4, it's usually the fourth in the series of trusts they've made that year using that general name. So it's just a shorthand that they use to describe their product. And sometimes if you're looking for information on a trust, if you just enter the letters SEC and then Harbor View 2005-4, it'll pop right up on your search and you'll find the latest loan reports, and sometimes you'll even find the PSA. So I put one in here. This is an example of what they're saying is going to be in this trust. They say that 73.6% of the loans have a prepayment charge. Now, why are they proud of that? Because it makes it less likely, perhaps, that people will pay off their loan right away, and your income stream will be adversely affected. Remember, what you're buying as an investor is the income stream from 5,000 mortgages. So if somebody gets penalized for prepaying their mortgage, they're less likely to prepay it, and your income stream is going to continue unhampered for at least 5 years. How many are fixed rate mortgages? 15.61%. Second lien mortgage, and so you see, and I think that's high. The vast majority of the mortgages in these trusts are adjustable rate mortgages. Second lien mortgage loans was 4.18%. Interest only mortgage loans 16.94%. The range of remaining, most of the loans have between 116 months to 360 months. What you'll find is that the vast majority have 360 months. When they make these trusts, everything they put in it was probably a loan that was made in the last 2 weeks. The lender who lent the money for that loan probably had that loan on its books for anywhere between 32 seconds and 3 hours and 20 minutes. It went really fast from the lender to the securitizer. And I'll also explain that the lender probably didn't put up a penny to lend the homeowner money to buy for that loan. The lender got the money from something called a warehouse lender. So they borrowed from X, they lent to Y, it was on their books for a few minutes, and they got a nice hefty little cut of the deal for that. And then they give things like the weighted average remaining is 357 months. So most of the loans in the trust, being 30-year mortgages, have probably been around for less than 3 months. The original principal balance ranges from $15,000 to $1,620,000, but the average original principal balance on the loans in this particular trust was $201,215. So all of this very specific information about the loans in a particular trust are set forth. So, and then toward the end, you'll see 26% of the loans in this trust were from California, 11% from Florida, New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. Now it just turns out that those are the states with the highest foreclosure rates right now, but it looked good on paper. If you were